Hey there, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the RocketMSP Podcast. I'm Steve Taylor, your host. Today I'm joined by Ken Dwight, the virus doctor. Ken, how you doing, sir?
Great, Steve. How are you?
Oh, what am I hearing? I just started getting myself in my ear. That's because I had the YouTube page open from earlier when I was sending it out to a few people. Fixed.
I didn't hear it.
Well, yeah, I was just coming through my headphones because it was on my computer. So, Ken, we're going to talk about something a little different for me today. Um, so, I like to focus on, managed services, automation, efficiency, doing, getting paid as much as I can for as little work as possible, right? Um, and and you're all about like virus remediation. This is very confusing for me because what I would do is, oh, hi, Mr. Customer, you got a virus? No problem. New image fixed.
Eh.
Why not?
There are times that could be an appropriate response, but in my experience, it mostly A is not necessary, and B could create a lot of additional problems, some of which might be unrecoverable, especially in the case of a small business or a home user that doesn't have all their stuff backed up. They may have some applications they couldn't reinstall, or they're written custom and the person that wrote them isn't around anymore. It opens a whole can of worms if you start off with, in effect, a new computer out of the box. So, and I say it's rarely necessary in my experience, but it's like so many other things. There's not an absolute black and white. There are times that wiping and reloading would make sense. In my opinion and experience, that's typically the large organizations that have regularly maintained image backups of the whole system. But if you're talking about going back to what a computer looked like when it first came out of the box, getting all the updates, reinstalling all the applications and all the settings, the data and the folders, and on and on and on and on, that's a good way to burn hours and hours and hours you can never bill for, and lead to other problems along the way, and the client will never speak to you again.
Got it. Okay, so um, I think that what you're saying is true. There are some things that are on these computers that you can't just walk up and re-image it and walk away and everyone's happy, because you're right. That's not a win-win. That's win-lose at best, right? The customer's unhappy, but maybe I got paid, right? So, um, I,
Once.
yeah, once and then never again. So why couldn't I just kind of take inventory of what's on the computer, run a Fabs auto backup, and then run an image?
That's fine for the data and the settings, but what about the programs? Fabs doesn't do the programs.
It doesn't, but so so you got to think though. This is Rocket MSP, right? So we're here talking about managed service providers, and managed service providers typically aren't supporting end users like consumers. They don't want to fix grandma's computer. They want to fix the CEO's computer or the engineer on the floor's computer. Um, those computers typically are running software that we have already kind of surveyed, scoped out, have a decent understanding of, or at least know how to reinstall it. If one of our clients, one of our end users, has like custom software on the computer, we should know about that, and we should know how to basically get that back on. If this is software that um, you know they they're not in business anymore, or it was custom written by one of those like access database pros, and maybe they retired or got hit by a bus or whatever, right? um, wouldn't we, the MSP, have gone in, taken them on as a client with a stipulation of, look, we're going to provide best effort service on this software, and you need to know that we need to replace that because reasons.
Well, and I don't argue with that. As you know, there are a wide range of MSP requirements, qualifications, capabilities, business sense, ethics, and so uh, all MSPs are not created equal.
Sure.
And I agree with you that if you have, in fact, as the MSP, done all that up front, and you have probably, if you've been that diligent, you do have some type of backup procedure that does involve a full image backup on some scheduled basis, whether it's weekly or monthly or something that wiping and reloading would be a good viable option there. I think what it comes down to is in the large organizations, you're going to have something like that. But in the smaller organizations or an MSP that is not what you and I would think of as being qualified to do what they're doing, you run the risk of creating new problems. And I come back to what I said in the first place. It's really not necessary. With a proper understanding of how to clean up malware, to detect it, get rid of it, keep it from coming back, that's a win-win for everybody. For one thing, you get it done in a reasonable amount of time. Now, when I say reasonable amount, my guarantee for people to take my workshop is 2 hours or less. The actual number is usually less than an hour. 40 to 50 minutes is kind of the average for a complete malware cleanup, removal, keep it from coming back type situation. And as you know, if you're doing it the old-fashioned way, which is either wiping and reloading or running a bunch of scans, it's another real common technique that a lot of less educated techs think they've got it. Well, I'll do a scan with this and this and this and this, and before you know it, you spent 6 or 8 or 10 hours scanning. And yeah, might have found something, might have gotten rid of it, at least gotten rid of the appearance of it. But good luck in billing for that. So, and granted, that's usually running on some machines while the tech's off doing something else. So it's not like they're tied to the keyboard for that 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 hours, or whatever it takes. But the client is out the use of that computer for that time, whether it's, it's certainly going to be measured in hours, if not days. So, again, it's not really necessary with the proper understanding of kind of how these things work, what to look for, how to get rid of it, keep it from coming back. One other thing that I'll just mention here, and kind of in the way of introductory remarks, as you know, a lot of MSPs out there, that is their billing model, but not their service model. They're not really managing anything. They're billing monthly and getting paid, but not really doing much in the way of proactive, preventive maintenance and monitoring and that sort of thing. And so it gets back to the basic qualifications and the integrity of a particular MSP. And so a lot of what I'm saying doesn't apply to the ones that you and I would consider to be qualified, legitimate MSPs doing what their client expects them to do. But unfortunately, that doesn't describe all of them.
Okay. So let's talk about that process that you say we should understand. Now, I know you've got this virus remediation training course, and that probably takes days to go through, not just an hour or two. So this is going to just kind of touch on some topics and not really dive too deep. I understand that. I think they understand that. So what does the process look like? 10,000-foot overview, bullet points.
Okay, great question. First of all, it was called the Virus Remediation Training Workshop for quite a few years. I actually first did it in 2009. So it's been 12 years now that I've been doing these workshops. And I was never that thrilled about the name. And, people, well, I haven't seen a real virus in a long time. It's kind of a techie thing to poo-poo the term viruses, but it's something that the general public understands, and so I'm known as the virus doctor. So I've kept it in the name for a long time. But I've said all along, if you could think of a better name for this class, let me know. And in fact, last year, January 1st of 2020, I did change the name of the training. It's now the Malware Incident Response Training Workshop. So,
That's sharp.
well, thank you. That's kind of, it's a term that I was hearing more and more, incident response, and that is what we're all about. It's not theoretical, pie in the sky, what if, how to, whatever. It's, you've got an infected machine, now what? So in other words, my workshop basically starts at an infection or compromise has happened. How do you deal with it? So in the workshop itself, most of what it's about is the methodology. And the methodology involves identifying the type of malware that you're faced with. And again, a lot of what I say and terms I use are not things that I'll take credit for inventing or being the only one that says them or does them, but it's in a form that I think makes sense and works. And so overall, in terms of malware, I talk about 4 categories of malware. And I address them in the sequence that you need to look at them, look for them, get rid of them. First being encrypting ransomware. If you have a case of encrypting ransomware, you're going to know it, the client's going to know it, they've got the messages on the screen, they can't access their data files, they know there's an issue. So that's what you have to deal with first. And once you've gotten past that, there could very well be other malware that doesn't happen to be ransomware. Either it came along with it, or it was there all along and the client or the user didn't know it, or whatever. And so there's 3 remaining categories beyond ransomware. The next one being pups or rogues. And as you know, these are programs that are just trying to get the user to buy something they don't need, whether it's a fake antivirus warning or fake hardware alert or stuff like that. But what those 2 categories, the ransomware and the pups or rogues, have in common is they're obvious, they're visible. The user knows there's something there that they need to do something about. But then you get to the 3rd category, which is traditional malware. Traditional malware, viruses, worms, Trojans, in most cases are sophisticated enough that they go to great extent to keep the user from knowing that their computer is infected, or even keep the average tech from knowing. Because as you know, when that malware is on that machine, the person behind it is making money. The longer it stays on that machine, the more money they're making. If they do something stupid that makes it obvious the machine's infected, then the client or the user is going to call you. They're going to get rid of it. Then the gravy train stops. So they put a lot of effort into keeping the malware invisible, or at least not visible unless you know exactly what to look for and where it is and what to do about it. So in the overall methodology that I teach, that's the area that you typically spend the most time in, because you have to make the basic determination, is there a traditional piece of malware involved? And then deal with it and get rid of it and keep it from coming back. The 4th category is less prevalent now than it was for a good while, but it's still a factor, and you still see it fairly often, is rootkits. Rootkits are, as you know, deeply buried in the operating system itself. So they're even tougher to identify and get rid of in a lot of cases than traditional malware. So point is, in the methodology, I talk about each one of those a step at a time, what to look for, and a step-by-step procedure. So a lot of this involves what's known as indicators of compromise, or IOC. I also refer to those as the hiding places as to how the malware starts or how it maintains persistence. You hear the term APT, Advanced Persistent Threat. And that just implies that if the user just shuts down and restarts, then it'll come back. It's not going to go away from a simple reboot like that. And so there's so many factors that come into play, and you need to be able to understand kind of how the stuff works. Now, when I say that, the workshop is not, let me just address one other thing so that we'll put some numbers on what you said initially. The workshop itself is 8 hours of hands-on training. And that's normally structured in 2 half-day sessions. I do 4 hours one day and 4 hours the next day. And that's either in person or remote. So with that, I used to do it all in one day. In fact, over the 12 years now that I've been doing it, the course has evolved so much. A lot has been added. Some things have been taken out. When I first started, it was just about Windows XP. And of course, that was a long time ago. And there is still some residual XP stuff in the workbook and the materials, but most of it's just there for historical reference or just in case you still have that one-off user that has an XP machine or whatever. But the point is, there's so much that changes, but so much of it has stayed the same. So in the overall workshop, in that it's broken down into 4 sections. The first section is introduction. I spent about an hour just kind of laying the groundwork, talking about how malware has evolved over the years, and some of the terminology, and just general stuff to kind of set the stage and lead into what we're going to talk about from there. After that, I was going right into the methodology, the step-by-step procedures to identify and get rid of the malware. But then I realized that to understand that and do it effectively really requires a pretty good understanding of the registry. Now, all of us are techs. We've been in a registry. We know what it's all about generally. And my experience with most techs is their knowledge and understanding of the registry is based on, well, I had a problem, did a Google search, it said to go to the registry and change this key, and they did it. So then they consider themselves a registry expert. Well, that's okay when somebody gives you a cookbook formula. But as you know, most of this we're doing on the fly. You look for something and respond to it, and it goes from one step to another. So it really requires a deeper level of understanding of the registry than what most techs, even pretty advanced techs, have. So as a result of that, what I've done in the workshop is the second session is just about the registry. And that runs about 2.5 hours. So before we even get into the methodology, I want to make sure that everybody has a good enough understanding of the registry to be able to understand what I'm talking about when I talk about these different registry keys and the types, the data types, and the things to look for and that sort of thing. Because as you know, there are millions of entries in the registry. And so I'm not going to explain every one of them. I don't know what 99% of them are, but I do know the ones that are most likely to be related to malware and what you need to know about them and do with them and that sort of thing. So once that understanding of the registry is established, then we get into the actual methodology. And that part is another 3.5 hours or so. Then the fourth session is the lab session, where I demonstrate some tools. Now, when I talk about tools, I'm not talking about the scanning tools generally. Again, the workshop is not about running a bunch of scans. That's a good way to spend a lot of time you can't bill for and may or may not be effective. As you know, there's no one scanning tool or combination of scanning tools that are going to find and remove all the malware that's out there. In some cases, they'll remove the symptoms, but the next time the user reboots or does something else, it comes right back. And then you've really got egg on your face. So in the methodology, which is usually on the second day, I usually get into about the first half hour of the methodology on that first day and kind of get through the overall ransomware discussion. Then I have a recorded session on ransomware that I encourage them to watch between now and the second day. And that's a recording of a presentation I made called Anatomy of a Ransomware Attack. And it talks about, the average user looks at their screen and they have this message about your files are encrypted, they can't get their data, and they think that just happened. Well, in fact, ransomware has happened over some period of time, at least a few hours, more likely days, weeks, or even months. And so the more the tech understands about how that whole ransomware attack unfolds and what all has happened before the user ever sees any indication, or there's ever any ransom demand or any inability to access the data files, then there is a definite window in there that gives the tech a good opportunity to catch that ransomware and get rid of it before it encrypts any data files. So that's the type of stuff that's covered. In fact, in that video, I talk about 13 stages of the ransomware attack. And only the last couple of stages are the actual encryption and displaying the message on the screen. So that's about where we get to in the first day of the workshop. We pick up the next day, about 20 hours later. Hopefully that has had a chance to percolate in their minds a little bit and bring up some questions that they have thought of right after we disconnected or in the shower the next morning or whatever. And so the second day, we jump right back into the methodology and go from the ransomware into the rogues and pups, which is usually a pretty short discussion because those are less common and less sophisticated now than they were a few years ago. And so that's the easiest of the four categories to deal with. Then I'll spend a good bit of time on traditional malware, viruses, worms, and Trojan horses. And most of that is about the infection vectors, the indicators of compromise, things they can look for, mostly in the registry. And so we actually talk about hundreds, and literally something over 300 registry keys that I have personally seen used as infection vectors, and how to quickly go through those and kind of the low-hanging fruit where you're most likely to find the different types of things hanging out and what to do about them. And the fourth session is scheduled for about an hour, but actually section 3 and 4 during the actual methodology, we kind of morph into some of the tools and techniques and demos, that sort of thing. But overall, it's a full 8 hours over 2 days live, plus about another total of 6 or 8 hours of recorded, including the ransomware video and some others that they don't really need to hear live. They can do more at their convenience or go back and watch them again whenever they want to.
So you mentioned that there's like 300 registry keys that you've personally seen used as an entrance. We should be adding an alert into our RMM tools that lets us know of any changes in these keys.
And there are some products out there that will do that, including one that was developed specifically for me that's only available to graduates of the workshop. I've actually have a database of those common indicators of compromise and registry keys that are used by malware. And this one tool that they can run in about 2 minutes checks all of those. And so it's not really a malware scanning tool. There's no scanning. It's look at this registry key, this is what should be in there, this is what to do if it's not. And so that's one of the things that comes with the training is my tool set. But yes, in fact, I just literally about an hour ago, I had a Zoom meeting with Huntress. And I'm sure you're familiar with Huntress. One of the pieces they include in their product is what they call the ransomware canaries. And that's looking for an early indication. Now, in that conversation, just literally an hour ago, I did get some clarification on something I had assumed and I was mistaken about. The ransomware canary is only triggered once the encryption starts. So, and the good news is the way they've done it, the ransomware canaries are designed to be some of the first files that are encrypted. So at that point, they can at least theoretically shut down the encryption process and have minimal damage. But there are about another 10 steps before that where the ransomware is on the machine and active. It just hasn't gotten that far. So there are other tools that could look for some of those IOCs at that point and say, this shouldn't be here. And whether that's by triggering an alert on a particular key that was changed, or some daily or hourly or some scheduled check, not with a scanning an anti-malware type program, but more a program that looks specifically for those registry keys that are commonly compromised, then there are plenty of opportunities to detect that and shut it down before it does any real damage. But there again, it requires an understanding of how this stuff works. Now, having said that, let me just clarify, my workshop is not about prevention. I'm not poo-pooing prevention, but I'm saying the starting point is you have an infected machine, now what? And so by definition, prevention, you're too late. But in going through the workshop and seeing how all this stuff happens, then that better prepares the tech to know what kind of preventive measures to take. Things like what a huge infection vector RDP has been. The effectiveness or ineffectiveness of different tools out there in terms of anti-malware products. And there are hundreds of them. And of course, each one, so if you use our tool, you don't need anything else. And we all know that's not accurate. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think they all say that, and um, none of them are telling the truth, except maybe tools like ThreatLocker, where it doesn't trust anything, and it's a whitelisting app, and you have to approve the use of an application to run.
Yeah, yeah, and whitelisting is an approach that has some real benefits. The big downside to whitelisting has been it doesn't scale well. So if you're talking about a single user and a PC-matic, then yeah, once they've approved certain things that PC-matic didn't know about by default, then they're okay. But if you're talking about an MSP client with hundreds of desktops and different departments doing different things with different programs, traditionally a whitelisting approach turns into more of a hassle with the false positives or whitelisting legitimate programs. And there's ThreatLocker and White Cloud are a couple of similar products in terms of making the whitelisting more scalable. And I frankly don't have firsthand experience with either of them, and so I don't know all the details, but I know that the concept of whitelisting certainly has some value. It, in my experience, has fallen down in practice. But in fact, somebody, I forget where I saw it, just in the past few days, somebody posted somewhere that if the Colonial Pipeline had been running PC-matic, this problem they're having wouldn't have happened, which is probably accurate. Of course, generally speaking, when any organization has been hit by ransomware, if they were doing everything they should have been doing and knew how to be doing, and their MSP had suggested they do or encouraged them, most of these wouldn't have happened in the first place.
All right, so let's talk about how do we know, other than I'm trying to figure out the right way to word this. So if we've got our antivirus and it says it found a virus and it quarantined it, cleaned it, got rid of it, whatever, in your opinion, we don't even need to go through your steps because the software did its job and it prevented this situation, correct?
No. In my opinion, that's when you really need to go through my steps, because there has been a piece of malware that was so poorly written and so trivial that the anti-malware product picked up on it. And most of the significant malware and ransomware we see these days, these people they're making big bucks. And before a piece of malware even goes out there these days, from what I would consider a serious malware organization, they have run it through all the anti-malware programs. There are services out there that will say, send us your malware, and we'll put it through the different anti-malware programs and see which ones catch it, which ones don't, and how they caught it, and what you can do to keep it from being caught next time. So
that can't be true.
That is absolutely true. I'm surprised you're not aware of that.
I'm not, to be honest. I didn't think about that. I don't go looking around what all's available on the dark web.
I don't either.
I haven't had any interesting conversations with too many security vendors lately about this type of stuff. I'd love to get like Huntress and Sophos and all these other guys on here so we can just talk about what are they seeing happening in today's security landscape and all that stuff. I just, they're on the to-do list. They're on my hit list, if you will, of vendors I still need to reach out to. All right. So if our antivirus or anti-malware, endpoint management, whatever, if it detects something, then we really need to go through your steps.
Yeah.
If it doesn't detect something, how do we know that there's a virus then? How do we know we need to go through your steps?
That's what I talk about in the workshop. The fact that, again, of the four categories, encrypting ransomware and the pups and rogues, the user's going to know, you're going to know, that's not an issue. But when you get to the traditional malware, the first step in there is making that determination, is there malware present? And so that's a good bit of what we talk about in the early part of that session 3 of the workshop. is making that determination, what to look for, how to know, and some tools you can use. Process Explorer has, and some of this is not very well known. And there again, some of the things I talk about in the workshop, I'll put it this way. Anybody that goes through this workshop is going to know a lot of what I present in there. Because it's, again, some of the stuff hasn't changed in all these years. And somebody's been doing it for a while. They're going to say, oh, yeah, I know that. But then if they listen carefully, they're going to hear a twist on it they haven't thought about or haven't seen before. And in some cases, that's something I discovered on my own. In some cases, it's something I saw in a Hunter's webinar or in talking to another tech that had a similar problem. And so to me, that's one of the biggest problems that we as techies face. There is such a common tendency for techs to think that they know everything and nothing ever changes. And I literally have some people, and I don't even try to sell my training to these people, but I can spot them right off. The ones who are doing the same things today they were doing 10 years ago, the same way with the same tools. And those are people I don't want in my workshop because they're not doing their clients a good service. And I forget how I got off on that tangent.
Why wouldn't you want them in your workshop? Because don't you want them to do it the right way?
I do, and they're not going to. They're going to come into it with the mindset, I already know everything, and my boss said I got to go to this workshop. And so then if they keep screwing up, that's going to make me look bad because I say, well, I went through Ken Dwight's class. I've got the piece of paper right here that says so. So I don't need that.
All right. So I asked you, how do we know a computer's infected when the antivirus doesn't detect anything? And you gave me a non-answer because your answer was, oh, you'll learn that in the workshop. But
okay.
We're not in the workshop. We're in
I apologize. I did not mean to phrase it that way. What I gave was the beginning of an answer because depending on the particular type of malware that you're dealing with, we talk about these different registry keys and the persistence mechanism, which in the old days, the way that malware got there in the first place was with an entry in the run keys. And the run keys are what you see in msconfig or the startup tab of Task Manager and then later operating systems. And so I take you right into those run keys, where they are, what they look like, what they do, and symptoms that are typical of malware. We go into the different parts of the registry, like just the Win logon subkey under HKey local machine. There are at least a dozen different infection vectors I've seen in there. And so I talk about what to look for there, including some that look very normal and straightforward. You kind of just not even give them a second thought. As an example, without having regedit open in front of me and showing you exact indications, let's say that in the run keys, and I'll just assume that you and the typical MSP tech watching this knows what a run key is. But that is a program that's going to start up automatically at startup time, either at Windows Start or when that user logs on. And the format is on the right-hand side of the screen, you've got the name of that entry, then the data type, then the content. And all of the entries in the run keys are going to be some type of string data, either reg SZ or reg multistring or reg variable string. And what you may see is one or more entry that doesn't have anything in the content. It's got the name and the reg underscore SZ and then nothing beyond that. And so the average tech, well, that's not doing anything. It's not going to hurt me. So they just go on, look somewhere else. Where in fact, if they double clicked on that entry, they might see that it's got about 100 spaces and then the executable name. So it's farther out so that it won't show up in regedit when you're just looking at that run key. But when you look at that particular entry, you'll see that, as you know, within the registry, it doesn't matter how many spaces there are, 1 space or 100 or 1,000. It looks to see if there's anything more in that line. And if it's way beyond where the bad guy knows that the tech is likely to have his regedit screen end, then it'll look like there's nothing out there. So that could be in a run key. And a similar thing on the WinLogon. There's several entries, one in particular that has gone away with Windows 8 and 10, but it could still be there, that normally doesn't have anything in that right-hand side. The criminals could put that back in there and put something in the right-hand side, an executable that happens to be far enough out that it's not visible in that regedit view. So those are a couple of examples of the type of things that when you know enough to know what to look for, you pick up on them. And even those are fairly unsophisticated in the overall scheme of things, because they are string data. They're easy to spot if you know what you're looking for. And some of them are much more subtle, much more deeply hidden. So there again, I've got examples. And now, to clarify one thing I said, when I mentioned the 300 plus keys that we look at, we don't actually look at each one of those keys, but I give reference to them and screenshots and talk in general terms, like there are locations of default files. They come in 6 different places in the registry. And each one of those places has anywhere from 10 or 12 to as many as a couple of dozen file locations, any of which could be compromised by the criminals to take you somewhere other than the normal default location. So we don't go through the mechanism of looking at all 96 of those or however many there may happen to be on a machine. But that's one of the things that my automated program that I talked about a minute ago does look for. But where we really concentrate the effort is in the run keys, WinLogon, and certain other common areas that are frequently used by malware, whether it's ransomware or even pups or rogues for that matter.
All right. So let's say we've looked at our registry keys and we've kind of determined, all right, this looks like we might have an issue. So I just delete the registry key and the problem solved, right?
If you're real lucky. One of the things that I talk about in the methodology is going through, and this is the tedious part, and that is going into Task Manager or Process Explorer and looking at every process that's running and look for things that jump out at you as being a malicious or more likely a suspicious process. Because right now, if I look at a typical Windows 10 machine, there are a couple of hundred processes running. And even though I have seriously looked at and been inside of thousands of machines over the years, I will not claim that there's one of them that I could tell you absolutely certainly what each one of those was. But I can tell you what the common patterns are and some names that I would recognize or patterns of names. And so point is, you go through the list, you see one that you think might be malicious. What I recommend you do at that point is kill it and see what happens. When you kill that process, one of two things is going to happen. A, it might kill Windows. If it does, then that lets you know it is a required process for that program for Windows to run on that machine right now. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's not malware, because a common infection vector is to take explore.exe, infect it, and rename it to load.exe. That's an old piece of malware called Surcam that I first saw in Windows 95. So it's been around that long, but it's still out there today occasionally. But point is, Surcam infects and renames explore.exe to load.exe. Well, if you kill load.exe, you've killed Windows. And so if you rename it, or if you go back into where it was in the registry and put explore.exe, there is no explore.exe anymore. It's been renamed and infected. So that's an example of kind of have to go through the steps. But in most cases, when you kill that suspicious process, it's not going to kill Windows. Everything is going to keep running normally, at least to all appearances. So the next thing you want to look for is, does it come back on its own? And that's a pretty good red flag. Again, back to the persistence mechanism. What most of the sophisticated malware these days will do is have a way of coming back even after the tech or the user has shut down, restarted, killed it, deleted it, or whatever. And that's commonly done through what's known as a buddy process. And in simplest terms, the buddy process means that out of those 200 processes, there's one that's the actual malware. There's another one that is the buddy. The buddy is not malware. The buddy has one purpose. It is to see if that main malware process has been shut down, terminated, killed, deleted, and if it has, to restart it, reinstall it if necessary, re-download it if necessary. And that's a pretty common technique that's been around for quite a few years now. So the point is, if you kill a process and Windows seems to be running normally, nothing seems to have changed, but within a minute or even a few seconds, that process gets restarted, pretty good indication that there's a buddy process running. So there's a separate procedure to deal with that situation.
All right. And then I would suspect that some of the best malware authors are writing it to be like omnidirectional. The buddy process checks the virus is running, the virus checks that the buddy process is running. That way, if you try and kill the buddy process first, then kill the virus program, it'll bring back the buddy process before you can kill the virus program.
I have not seen that be the case yet. And that's why in the actual methodology I teach to identify the buddy process, kill it first, and then kill the malware process and get rid of both of them. I've never seen them come back.
Well, for you virus writers who watch this, now you know what you need to do.
Well, there's another twist on it as well. And it's something that's not nearly as common, but I have seen three-way buddy processes. So there's another process monitoring the buddy process to see if it gets killed. So I've only seen that a time or two.
I've got to say, I've had plenty of viruses with buddy processes. Never had a three-way.
I think I've seen two of them over the years. So it's definitely not something you see a lot of.
It's like a unicorn.
Almost. But one thing I preach from the very beginning is some of the stuff in the workbook, for instance, I haven't seen in years. But you can never count on anything being gone forever. Some of the infection vectors that were in the autoexec bad and config sys files, I still have them in my workbook because somebody some days would say, hey, I bet they wouldn't think to look here. So nothing, you can never be sure that any technique or approach or infection vector is gone for good. Any of them could come back anytime.
All right. So we've identified a registry key. We've identified a process and maybe a buddy process or two or three or however many. So we delete the key, we delete the virus executable, we delete the buddy process or processes. Problem solved now, right?
Yes and no. In fact, let me just, I want to refer to something and let's see. Okay, and I'm looking at some of my workbook, and I want to quote from some of it here just to give you.
So to clarify, are you quoting yourself?
Yes. But sometimes what I say in print is more eloquently worded and more carefully refined than what I'd say off the top of my head. What I'm looking for is when I get into the traditional malware. Okay, well, of course, I'm not finding what I was looking for. But I talk about the stages of, let me go back. And I made it a point to have this at my fingertips. Okay, I've got the four major Oh, there we go. There we go. It was above. I talk about the four stages of malware removal. And this is before I get into the four categories, actually. Detection, making the initial determination as to whether or not the device is actually infected. Identification, and that is not necessarily the exact name of the malware, but more categorizing it, figuring out which one of these categories it falls into. Then neutralization. Neutralization is stopping it from doing what it's doing, and that's how far we've gotten right now. That's the third part, the third stage of malware removal. And then the fourth stage is removal, where once it's actually neutralized, not doing anything, then remove it. Now, the first part of that will be the actual executable. Delete it or rename it or do something else with it so that it won't run anymore. But the reality is that in most cases, there are a lot of other associated files, whether they're DLLs or VXDs or 386s or additional EXEs, other subfolders, that sort of thing. There's a lot of other stuff that comes along with it. And so the final stage in dealing with traditional malware is to run a scan to get rid of all that left behind detritus, for lack of a better term. And it's not really hurting anything, but you don't really want it to be cluttering up the system, and for that matter, making it easier for the bad guys to possibly resuscitate just those one or two files that were deleted by your manual process. So long way to get to where I was going.
No, it's okay. So I've got to say, I still think that, going through the malware remediation and doing the incident response and cleaning it up and having it go away, I think that this is good for us as technical people to understand, but I still don't know if this is the right way to go about things with our current security climate. Ken, I don't trust the computer once it's had some type of malware infection. You got to think, like, I've got some people that have sent me some private messages, so I'm not going to name names. One gentleman said, in the age of independent computers, this methodology made sense. Nowadays, unless it's critical infrastructure, there's no reason to waste more than an hour troubleshooting a virus issue. All of my services, 365, user setup, it's all automated. 90% of the end user software is automatically installed. Only things that are not automatically installed is software that's typically over a gig in size. Additionally, it's hard to fully trust a software system with a known compromise in today's day and age. If the virus was able to get past a modern AV, it is highly likely that there will be lingering trace issues or other time-released items that are dormant. Can it be trusted in production? No. So that takes what I'm trying to say and very eloquently just puts it out there for people. I just don't know that doing this type of stuff as an MSP makes a whole lot of sense. Doing this for a consumer computer, for grandma's computer with the virus, or your cousin who just wants you to help them out in a bind. Yeah, sure, absolutely. But if we're talking about the law firm or your CPA firm that are a great client of yours and paying you thousands of dollars a month for you to make sure that their computers and network and everything are safe, I just don't think this is the way that we should be doing it these days.
Well, there's several pieces to that I'd like to parse and talk about individually. For one, I am in complete agreement that it does not make sense to spend, and I'll say more than 2 hours on going through this procedure or cleanup. But again, the average time that it takes to go through this whole procedure is well less than an hour. 40, 50 minutes is the average. And there are plenty of cases where in 5 or 10 minutes, you can get the computer completely clean, functional, and usable from that point on. So, but yes, if you're talking about the time it takes to go through a traditional malware cleanup, once you get past 2 hours, you're eating it. The client's not going to pay you more than 2 hours of time for any type of malware cleanup. But the other thing that I think is maybe even more important than that is that, let's say you wipe and reload. Once you've done that, that computer is back in the same condition it was in before it got infected successfully that last time around. So unless you figured out what kind of IOC there was, what kind of indicator, what kind of foothold they got in there, then you're just back at the same starting point, waiting for the same thing to happen again. So the point is, it requires, for you to keep that machine from getting infected again, you got to understand how it happened, where the infection was, and going beyond that, especially in the case of ransomware. Well, that's a whole different subject. But you got to figure out, how it got there and what you can do to keep it from happening again. And whatever you had before didn't work. It got infected. It got encrypted or hacked or whatever. And so, yeah, you've got some temporary relief by re-imaging it to what it was yesterday or last week or whatever, but you haven't really solved the problem.
Well, and when I would re-image to, like, not a backed up version of the computer. I would have, like, here's a generic image for XYZ client for this department, that department, et cetera, and it's got, Windows, the software they need, that type of stuff. And it's otherwise, it doesn't have data, it doesn't have a user profile, it is just a base image. And what my argument is, it's not about the time. It doesn't matter if it's 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 2 hours, 10 hours. We can't trust the machine. It's been infected. And now, can we confidently say, I am 100% certain that this machine does not have a virus on it anymore after I go through all the steps? Even if I take your workshop, not just watch this video. Let's say I take your workshop, I go through it, and then I run a computer through all of those steps. Can I say 100% that computer doesn't have anything hiding, lurking in the shadows? I think,
as you know, there's no 100%, but I will say that it would be very unlikely that there's any remaining trace after you go through the whole methodology that I teach. Now, again, the scenario you described, I would not argue against that. If you're in a situation where you have a generic image that everybody in a large organization has the same thing, and all that's different is their data, their user profile, that sort of thing, then I don't disagree that wiping and reloading in that situation is not a bad approach. And it may be the quickest. And that's kind of the standard in large organizations. But again, with the small MSPs and the small shops, the mom and pops, the home users rarely have that. Or in a lot of cases, they may think they do, and when it gets right down to it, they really don't. So if they have that where everything is that cut and dry, that straightforward, then sure, wipe and reload. But my experience has been that the vast majority of MSPs, smaller ones anyway, don't provide that level of backup capability and recoverability.
Sorry, I just realized how dry my mouth is. All right, so tell me this. If I were to take your course, am I going to, like, figure out how this virus got onto the computer? Because I don't know that the problem is ever truly solved unless we know how it got there. Was it emailed to them? Was it, user manipulation? Or was it something that they downloaded some crap they shouldn't have, maybe from BitTorrent or whatever, or they're going to websites that are not really work appropriate or whatever, right? Like, how did it get there? How do we know it's not going to come back?
Well, the short answer is we don't. And again, the workshop is not as much about prevention and all the stuff. I mean, people hopefully already know about the danger in email attachments and clicking on links and that sort of thing. Unless you are in an enterprise type environment or a large hardware software configuration where you have a lot of logs that you could trace all this stuff back, that's usually just kind of nice to know stuff. But if you can recognize where the actual indicator of compromise is and keep it from coming back, then you've solved the problem. So I'm not trying to downplay the importance of the reverse engineering, the forensics, the disassembling, and that sort of thing. But that's where you burn up a lot of time that is important if you're talking about an enterprise situation or an organization that has cyber insurance, and they've got to figure out all that and justify the claim or deny it or that sort of thing. But it's typically not as big a concern for the people that I'm working with as solving the problem. Now, in the course of solving the problem, then you see where the IOC was, and if something like that comes back again, then you've got a better timeline on, well, what's happened since we got it back here? Did you go look through their emails or look through their downloads folder or whatever logs they have on their firewalls or their server, or there are places you can do some fairly rudimentary backtracking to see where they might have gotten the infection. If it's RDP, then that's pretty easy to spot too. So once you know kind of what the options are, then the process of elimination will help.
And I can appreciate that, but I think that we right now are, and I just want to be clear. Like I like Ken. I'm not here trying to like crap all over Ken. Okay, guys. So this is us hopefully having a kind of friendly debate.
Yeah.
I'm coming from the. This is a concern, right? This is an ongoing concern, security, and it's going to just continue to get worse as the weeks, months, years go on, because you just got to look at where were things 3, 4, 5 years ago? Where are things now? We started getting weird malware, and then we started getting ransomware, and now we're in something completely different. Like now, it's still like ransomware, but it's evolved. Like now they're being strategic about who they're going after in some ways, where they're like, hey, let's go after a pipeline or NIH or whatever else, right? Whereas before they'd just be like, yeah, let's get a Bitcoin from somebody back when it was worth $600. All right, so let's talk about what I think I'm disagreeing with right now.
Okay.
So you said that the people that you're working with really don't care so much about like how it got there. They just care about fixing the problem. But if we don't know how it got there, it's just going to keep happening. Which for a break fix shop where they've got that $95 virus special, that's like awesome, because now like every month they're going to have Jim bring in his computer because he keeps clicking on the same porn ads and he's got to get the virus removed again. But that doesn't really fix the overall problem. It just fixes the tiny problem that Jim has created. What we need to do is we need to understand how that virus got there, because we need to understand what we need to train the user to be doing differently. This ultimately is usually a user-caused issue. Am I right or am I wrong?
Historically, you're right. In today's environment, not as right as you were a few years ago.
Sure, but if we're talking about the type of viruses that you're talking about removing, if somebody gets ransomware, unless they've got a backup or pay for the encryption key, they're effed, right? You're not remediating that and decrypting the data magically. You don't have a magic wand in your toolkit, do you?
No.
Okay. So they're still screwed. They need to understand how they got ransomed. They need to understand, what steps they took that they shouldn't have. And this really needs to be more about us understanding where this came from, so that way now we can provide the real value, and that is educating them to not do it again. Yes, we should be able to clean, and to be clear, at that point it doesn't matter. Nuke and pave, image, have the remediation training, do that stuff. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, unless we fix the real problem, which usually is the user, whether they are in places that they shouldn't be or click something that they shouldn't have, we're never going to truly solve this. And again, if we're looking at the break fix shop and going, hey, I'm happy just making my $95 for the virus removal, great, more power to you. Take his training and be even more efficient at removing viruses. So now you can have 10 of these systems on the bench and get them all done in an hour, same day turnaround, right? But for the MSP, for the company that is trying to provide value services to businesses, regardless of the size of the business, even if it's the mom and pop coffee shop or whatever down the road, right? They need to know how to keep their business safe. Not just, I removed the virus. I'm pretty sure QuickBooks won't get it sent over the wire to somebody else so that people can look at your books and get bank account information and whatever else you have in there.
Well, the infection vectors haven't really changed over the years. There's still only a few ways to get infected in the first place. And a lot of it does come down to user training, whether it's the phishing emails, the infected links, the different things that the user can be trained to look for and not do. In addition to that, you've got the infected websites. You have websites that have malvertising in them that the user really can't do much about. And so there you have to rely on more automated tools to detect them and pick up on them, block them somehow. You have RDP and you have lateral movement across a network. So that's pretty much it in terms of how a machine got infected in the first place. But what they all have in common is they're going to end up in one of those registry keys or some indicator of compromise that once you recognize and pick up on, if it's in the run key, you can keep anything from being changed in the run key. And so again, once you understand the mechanism and how it all plays out, then without having to know exactly what email from whom and what link and what attachment or whatever, you don't have to know those details. You can block that avenue.
Got it. I think that, we kind of touched on the fact that this isn't, what your course does is it doesn't really talk about the prevention. It talks about the remediation. And I think you need to use like the modern security solutions, like, whether that's, you installing Huntress and Sentinel-1 or Sophos, whatever you're going to use, right? You're going to have something on those computers, and you might even have some type of EDR, MTR type solution service, whatever. You might have a SOC SIM where you're collecting logs and you're really being able to look and see everything that's happening on that machine to kind of be able to pinpoint how this infection got there. But if you're using these modern security solutions to know all this stuff, and you've already got it in place and you see something happening, you're probably not going to be using the virus doctor's methodology to clean these things up, because I mean, let's be honest, if you're watching every file modification and every registry change as they happen when reviewing the logs, I mean, it's basically just showing you everything as it happens, right?
Yeah, good luck with that. Yeah,
Why is
tens
that?
of thousands of incidents. Yeah.
Well, but that's
I
what
know
a
there are some
SOC is
tools.
designed for, man.
Well, I know there are some tools out there that will help go through those logs and pick out what really matters. But I hear so many complaints about how completely overwhelming it is to try to pick out anything from logs, especially when there are a lot of endpoints involved. And again, that's beyond what I normally deal with. So I'm not speaking from firsthand experience, just from anecdotal things I've heard.
And you might be hearing that from um, small computer repair shops that are trying to get into the MSP game, or the old dogs that don't want to learn new tricks, or whatever, right? But the simple facts, man, right now, security is huge. I don't know if you saw, but last night the president just signed an executive order. We now have like regulation that if somebody I think I have not read it. I'm going to actually read it, and I want to talk about it with somebody on here. But from what it looks like, we're actually going to be required to report breaches, even if our contracts with our clients state confidentiality and all that type of stuff. Like,
Well, I have
so
not seen or heard that, but well, we'll deal with it if it becomes law or whatever.
well, it just got, I believe it already got signed yesterday. Executive order. Let me look here. President signs executive order charting new course to improve the nation's cybersecurity and protect federal government networks. And it mentions, I'm looking at the statement right now on the whitehouse.gov website. It mentions by name SolarWinds, Microsoft Exchange, and the Colonial Pipeline incident. So, yeah, it's going to remove barriers to threat information sharing between government and the private sector, modernize and implement stronger cybersecurity standards in the federal government, improve software supply chain security, establish a cybersecurity safety review board, create a standard playbook for responding to cyber incidents, improve detection of cybersecurity incidents on federal government networks, improve investigative and remediation capabilities. So, I mean, that's kind of right up your alley right there. A lot of that, you heard they're talking a lot about detection, investigation, and remediation. So I strongly recommend you look into that, Ken, because we're like 24 hours out from this happening. You want to be at the forefront of this, so that way the virus doctor can continue to educate new and former graduates.
I will look into it. Thank you.
I also think that more regulation than this is coming.
Yeah.
And
well,
because of all that, I think that you're going to probably need to make some big updates, or maybe even just make a whole new training course, because I think there's value in what you're doing, Ken. There truly is. But I think that pushing to just clean up a virus with the way everything works these days is a concern. I think it's scary. I think that this should be less let's clean it up and more let's see if something's really here. Let's go virus hunting, and let's see what's gotten past our antivirus, our AV. Let's teach the MSPs. Let's empower them so that way they know. Let's monitor these registry keys in their RMM tool. Like write some scripts or whatever that people can run in whatever RMM they're using, whether it's Synchro or Kaseya or ConnectWise, whatever, right? And now you're selling value based on your years of knowledge and experience, but it's updated to something that today's MSP, today's managed service provider, can really take, harness, use, and deliver real value to their clients. But that's just my opinion, man.
Well, and it's a valuable opinion. One thing I'll just mention is that what the president signed is clearly directed at the large organizations, the ones that you hear about in the newspapers that or online news sources that have suffered these breaches. And there's a separate issue of pending regulation or coming regulation for MSPs. My suspicion is what he addressed, he probably doesn't even know what an MSP is. I think everything that you just quoted there is based on the end user organization exposure and responsibilities. And some of those right. MSPs might be involved.
This is all directed at government, mostly on a federal level, not even at the state, region, local, whatever. And at the enterprise, but it all trickles down.
Yeah.
So whatever they put into place, unless they put stipulations like they had to do with, like the PPP loan, like, Chase Bank and all these huge enterprise companies were able to get their PPP loans.
Yeah.
And then when they rolled it out a second or third or whatever time, they were like, all right, well, clearly we did this wrong the first time, and now you can't have more than X dollars in revenue or whatever they did, right? So unless they say like this only applies to businesses with X dollars in revenue or higher, like it may apply to everyone. It might just be a blanket new cybersecurity rules, deal with it.
Yeah.
And until we read the order, it's all speculation, right?
Yeah.
And in fact, I will probably, when we're done with this, I'm going to reach out to Dave Sobel and say, hey, executive order, when can I get you on? We need to talk about this.
Yeah, and as you know, Dave's a good source for information like that and about how MSPs are being potentially regulated and licensed and taxed and everything else.
Yes. Ken, I know that it feels like I probably beat you up a lot here. I love you, man. I truly wish the best for you and what you're doing, which is why I gave you just take that idea and run with it, man. I'm not looking for royalties or anything like seriously. If you think that there's going to be value in you offering that type of service, do it, because I'm all about doing whatever it takes to help MSPs, not just like the little break fix shops, but actual MSPs too, with improving their cybersecurity knowledge. And again, knowing all of this stuff about the registry and all the stuff that you're training, everything that leads up into, all right, let's go fix the problem in the labs. All of that is amazing information that I think everybody needs. But as soon as we get into, all right, I've remediated it, and now we're done, that's the part that scares me. And that's the part that I think maybe we just look into a little bit further and make sure that this is truly the case. Because I just don't trust anything in today's day and age, man. I don't even trust my mom.
And I'm sure it's mutual. And one thing that I realize is I've kind of downplayed, well, not kind of, I have downplayed the prevention aspect. What I generally say is that starting with you're infected, now what, you kind of back into seeing how this stuff happened. And so it's, I don't lead with that, but when you go through seeing all the IOCs and all the different techniques and that sort of thing, then it kind of, you automatically understand, well, if the client had so-and-so, whether it's hardware, software, procedure, training, or whatever, then the result would be prevention, but it's not what I emphasize. So I probably need to change that emphasis.
Got it. Well, Ken, seriously, thank you for coming on here so we could have this discussion. I think that even the little bits that I got from you with just knowing that, like, yeah, there's a few hundred places in the registry that I always know to look, and this is what this type of key means, and when log on and things like that. Like, I learned something today, man. So truly,
Well,
thank
good.
you.
Well, before we go, I do
Please.
have one thing that I've kind of alluded to, but I'm ready to show you firsthand. Let me go back to, I've got a particular page for my workbook that I'd like to share. So if I go ahead and just click the share button.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And well, oh, here we go. That's what I'm looking for. Okay.
And just so you guys know, like, we had started the share earlier, but you've probably noticed Ken's video keeps getting like super, blurry and almost looks out of focus. Where it seems like he's having some bandwidth issues today. So we killed the remote stream, or the remote screen share, and that kind of fixed a lot of his issues that he was running into.
Okay, so I've mentioned
for you.
Okay, are you seeing my screen now?
Yep.
Okay, I've mentioned several times that the actual process, start to finish, takes less than an hour, and it could be a good bit less. This is a quick and dirty first step that could identify and get rid of malware issues in less than 5 minutes. And I know that you and all the MSPs that are watching this will recognize Process Explorer. You may not recognize some of the way I have mine configured, but in a fairly recent update, I say fairly recent, in the last few years, Mark has added the option to have a column here for virus total. And so I've added that along with a little bit of customization of the actual columns here. But the point is, this will look at every process and submit it to virus total and see what its analysis is. And I sort on that column so that these first three are the only ones that are non-zero. In other words, out of the 73 or 74 different sites that it's testing or that's asking about these processes, all the rest of these get a green light. They're not showing as malicious. And so anything that is shown as malicious will be at the top of the list. In this case, it's 3 false positives. But the point is, anything that really is malware, especially if it's been around for more than a few days, it's not going to be 1 or 2 or 3 out of 72 or 73. It's going to be 13 or 27 or 58 or some much bigger number. So point is, once you have...
I'm curious because I don't think I've used Process Explorer in a long time, so I just don't remember. What is the difference between the blue and red highlighted apps?
Well,
is one like this is a Windows built-in app and the others aren't? Or?
In general terms, the blue indicates that it's the pink background indicates that it's a supervisor state. It's part of the operating system or running as an extension of the operating system. And the blue is application state. So generally, when you sort by process, the default, you see mostly the pinks at the beginning and mostly the blues at the end. And those aren't absolute definitions. There's some that are blue that are actually working as part of the operating system. And there are actually over 10 different color codes used. In fact, there's one that's used to help you identify a buddy process. So a lot of good stuff. He's made a lot of improvements over the years, even after he sold out to Microsoft. In fact, it was actually updated 3 times last year. So it's still, it's not getting updated and improved as much or as frequently as it was in the early days, but there's still some good stuff. So again, just at a glance, if you sort by the virus total column and look for anything non-zero, then if everything shows up false positives like this or zeros, then you can be about 95% sure that that machine is not infected unless it's a rootkit or something in the hardware and in the firmware. So that's where we get into the not 100% area. But if I just want to see a quick and dirty first glance at where problems might be, that's something I'll frequently do and anybody can do for free.
All right. Well, Ken, seriously, thank you for being here. If you guys are interested in checking out no longer virus remediation training, it is malware incident response training. You can go to thevirusdoc.com, and he's got that like right near the top, center blue box. You can click read more, and you can get signed up to do that. Is the online remote whatever version that you do, is that like something that's scheduled, or is that pre-recorded? How do you do that?
None of them are pre-recorded. They're all done live, and I normally schedule 3 workshops per month, and they're usually on Tuesday and Wednesday. In fact, almost always on Tuesday and Wednesday, and 4 hours each session. One of them I schedule for in-person here in my office in Houston. The other 2 are online at different times of day. And so I schedule one from noon to 4 each day, Central Time, which is good for most of North America and the UK or Europe. Then I also schedule one for 6 to 10 in the evening, which is good for people in the US that have a day job or don't want to take prime time away. Most of us are night owls anyway. And so that's why I first started scheduling those. Then once I did, that's when the Aussies started signing up. Because, of course, 6 o'clock in the evening here is 9 o'clock tomorrow morning down under. So that's the general schedule. So in a normal, when you look at that page on the website, there normally will be 3 or 4 scheduled workshops over a period of a month. And I also do private workshops. If typically, if it's an MSP with 5 or more techs they need to train, then that would be more appropriate for a private workshop, which could be scheduled based on their availability and preferences.
Very cool. Well, Ken, thanks so much for being here. For those of you watching live, thank you so much for doing so. If you're listening online later on the podcast, Ken looks like he has something else. Hi.
Yeah, I had actually sent you a link to my Anatomy of a Ransomware Attack video. Do you have that?
I do. I actually I popped that into the RocketMSP community. So for those of you wondering what I'm talking about, if you go to rocketmsp.io, right now you can get signed up for the community free of charge, and it's basically a private forum. It's not on a Facebook group or a LinkedIn group or whatever. It's on my site. And we don't have to worry about the Zuck, removing stuff or whatever. Just play nice. That's all I ask. So yeah, if you go to the Rocket MSP community, you'll get access to that video, the anatomy of a virus attack,
a ransomware attack.
But that's I believe. Is that something that you normally let people watch? Is that like a public one?
Okay. It is normally for my alumni only, but I did make that available to your people. It was recorded in November, and here we are in May, and so there's some information that's a little bit out of date in terms of the number of ransomware families and ransom amounts and stuff like that, but the concepts haven't changed.
Well, thank you very much. So yeah, check out the Rocket MSP community, which again, just go to rocketmsp.io, and you can get signed up right there for the community. It is free to be in the community, and it's a really cool forum for MSPs to talk. Vendors can join, so feel free to pop in there yourself, Ken. It's totally cool. Just don't go in there selling stuff to people. Just be helpful.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you for the opportunity, Steve. It's been fun.
My pleasure. It's been great having you on. I always enjoy talking to you, Ken.
Thank you. I appreciate what you do.
Thank you. All right, everybody. For those of you watching live, thank you so much for all your comments and feedback. And for those of you listening later, feel free to head over to anchor.fm/RocketMSP. And there's a button that says like leave a message. And click there. I would love for you to send me a message. It's an audio message, which is extra weird, right, guys? But if you click on that, you can leave me a message with questions for the guests that I have coming up. Maybe you want to leave a question for Rob with One Mob, where we're going to talk about using video to increase engagement with prospects and clients. Or you want to leave one for Big Leaf Networks, where we're going to talk about some more SD-WAN type stuff. So, yeah, just take a look at the RocketMSP.io website. You'll be able to see the upcoming schedule of events. You can register for the newsletter and have that sent over to you. There's all kinds of great information on that website. All right, I've talked enough. Thanks so much, everybody. I will catch you all at the next episode.